Good evening, everybody. Great to see you. Good to see everyone tonight. Glad you're here. Hey, we got a great old hymn that we're going to kick off with tonight. It's number 504, and it's perfect for tonight. It's perfect for what we're going to be doing tonight. Number 504, the old rugged cross. Let's stand and sing together.
First, we'll do verses 1, 2, and 4.
You may be seated. Oh, hang on, Miriam. Hang on, Miriam. Would you do something for me? Would you sing the first stanza by yourself with Miriam? Would you do that?
And
Thank you, Christy. Thank you, Miriam. So much for that. Thank you. I hate it when people ask me to do things and I'm not prepared to do them. And I just did that. And I'm grateful for your willingness to do that. That was just special. Just special. We're going to talk about the cross tonight, and we're going to talk about the cross on Sunday. Hope you'll be here, traditional or modern. It's Palm Sunday. Hope you'll be here. It's an important time to be in worship, and so we're not going to cover everything about the cross tonight. We won't cover everything about the cross on Sunday, but I think the two go together, and I encourage you to be here for that. Kind of a sad night for me. We're finishing up. I love this time. This is special. This is just special time to me. This is a difference maker. I really, you know that I believe that. I've been saying it now for 20 weeks. I just think it's a difference maker. So as we come to the end of Matthew's gospel, I don't know. It's just a little bit sad in some ways. But I do need some time to prepare for our next one. I'm going to consider a mini-series. My wife would probably shoot me. Amy takes care of me. I hope you have somebody that takes care of you. But she kind of watches after me because she knows I'm stupid. And so she has some sense, thank goodness. But I do need some time to prepare. Our next study is going to be, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go New Testament, Old Testament, New Testament, Old Testament. You know, the Old Testament was Jesus' Bible. I think it's important to study the Old Testament. And so our next study is going to be on the book of Exodus, which I just think is such an important, it's so powerful for us. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to take some time in your classes, in your small groups, people that you run around with, in your neighborhoods, at your work, and I just want you to build it up. We'll start our study on Exodus in August. Okay, so you got some time. We'll see. We may do a little mini series, but I want you to take some time and really build that up. Here's our goal. Let me tell you, this is wonderful to see all of you here as we head up into spring. It gets tough in the springtime, and it's just great to see this crowd tonight. But our goal is to fill up the bottom. It's learning the message to live the message. I found in my life, at least, it's impossible to live the message if I'm not learning the message. If I'm not learning it, I can't live it. Because what I'm doing is I'm just living my way if I'm not constantly learning this. So I just find that to be very, very important, foundational for us. So if you'll help with that tonight, here's what we're going to do: two or three passages, starting with the 26th chapter. 26th chapter of Matthew's Gospel. We'll look at a different gospel Sunday, but 26th chapter of Matthew's Gospel for tonight, and I'm starting with the 36th verse. This is a powerful passage. We're going to read it. We're going to come back to it. I got a few things to do first, and then we're going to come back to it. Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go yonder and pray." And taking with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, he began to be sorrowful and troubled. I think that's just really important. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. He began to be sorrowful and troubled. And then this next part. Then he said to them, "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch with me." And going a little farther, he fell on his face and prayed. This part is really important. This is what he prayed. "My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Now you have to stop right there. And every time you read this, you stop right there. Because we want to go straight into the nevertheless. And the nevertheless is really important. But you have to stop first before you get to the nevertheless. It's really important to pray, to understand that the first part of that. My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. And he came to the disciples and found them sleeping, and he said to Peter, so could you not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. Again, for the second time, he went away and prayed, my Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, thy will be done. And again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. So leaving them again, he went away and prayed the third time, saying the same words. Then he came to the disciples and said to them, are you still sleeping and taking your rest? Behold, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand. Now let's read another passage, the 27th chapter. We'll come back to these. The 27th chapter, starting with the 45th verse. 27th chapter, 45th verse. Now from the 6th hour there was darkness over all the land until the 9th hour. And about the 9th hour Jesus cried with a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And some of the bystanders hearing it said, this man is calling Elijah. And one of them at once ran and took a sponge, filled it with vinegar, and put it on a reed and gave it to him to drink. But the others said, wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to save him. And Jesus cried again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. And behold, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And the earth shook, and the rocks were split. The tombs also were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. And then the last passage in the 28th chapter. It's the very end of the 28th, very end of Matthew's gospel, starting with the 16th verse. Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them, and when they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came and said to them, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And lo, I'm with you always to the close of the age. All right, so we'll go back then. Here's what I want to do tonight. I want to talk about the cross, and I want to talk about something that we all say and that we all believe. It's a basic foundational belief for us as followers of Christ. Jesus Christ died on the cross to save us of our sin. Jesus Christ died on the cross to save us of our sin. We all believe that, right? That's something that's foundational for us. We all believe that. Jesus Christ died on the cross to save us of our sin. Jesus dying on the cross happened over 2,000 years ago. So the question is, how does that work? Now, how does that work? Something happened over 2,000 years ago, and we're saying that saves us of our sin. Jesus Christ died on the cross to save us of our sin. And I want to look at that. I want to look at one way of looking at it tonight. It's a way that makes sense to me, and it's a way that makes sense to me from the Scriptures, because here's a fourth passage of Scripture, and we don't even have to turn in our Bibles for this one. It's John, the 3rd chapter, 16th verse. For God so loved the world So you put all of this together with, for God so loved the world, that he did what? That he gave his only son, begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. John 3:17, where he came into the world not to what? Do you remember that? Not to condemn the world. He came into the world not to condemn. He didn't come to condemn, but that the world might be saved through him. So I want us to, so we put that in the mix. We put that in the mix of this. Jesus Christ died on the cross to save us for our sin. You know, we've been working a lot backwards, you know, putting things in context. A lot of times we'll go to a passage, remember we go to the passage backward, we go to the end and then work back to what came before. We want to do the same thing on that phrase. Jesus Christ died on the cross to save us from our sin. You start at the back and work to the front of that phrase. To save us of our sin. There's a reason for the death on the cross, to save us of our sin. We start with sin, which is not a real popular thing for a lot of people, to start with sin. I told you when I first got here, and I would be confident that this is something that all the ministers on our staff could say. It's something that my guess is the ministers historically through this church would say. But I told you when I first got here, I'm a grace guy. I'm a grace man. My theology starts with grace. I think that's Wesleyan. I think that's Methodist. It's who we are as Methodist people. We start with grace, unearned, undeserved, unmerited love of God on our behalf. That God loves us. That God loves us in spite of. It's not an I love you if kind of love. That's our love, isn't it? You know, I love you if. But God's love for us through Christ is an I love you even though. Not I love you if, but I love you even though. Even though you fall short, even though you let me down, even though you turn away, even though you run from me, God just keeps loving us and coming after us, loving us and coming after us. So, if grace is our foundation, then what's the deal about sin then? I mean, where does sin get in the mix of all of this? Well, we remember the number one hymn, right? The number one hymn on the church charts. What's the number one hymn? What's the one that everybody knows? Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Several years ago, Amy gave me this little church, and it's just kind of a favorite little thing of mine. One is I just like the way that looks. Just kind of a simple little wood frame church. But if you wind it up a little bit, can you hear this? Isn't that cool? Now watch the front doors. Can you see that? The door's open. Now watch what happened. Can you see? There's a little preacher man that's going to come out. Did you see him come out? And what happens is he comes out and he sees the congregation and he goes back in real fast. Did you notice that? Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. By the way, that'll go off in about 30 minutes here. No, it'll go off in a few minutes. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I may have told you about my friend Mike down in Louisiana. We were singing Amazing Grace one Sunday. You know, even non-singers sing Amazing Grace. Did you know that? You look out in the congregation, even non-singers sing. Everybody sings Amazing Grace. And we were, one Sunday, ended the service with Amazing Grace, and I looked out, and Mike wasn't singing. And he was a good friend. And so a couple of days later, I ran into him at a church meeting. I said, Dad, I noticed you weren't singing Sunday. And he said, when? And I said, well, when we sang Amazing Grace. And he said, no. He said, I don't sing Amazing Grace. And I said, what? Mike, everybody sings Amazing Grace. And he said, I may be a lot of things, but I'm not a wretch. I may be a lot of things, he said, but I'm not a wretch. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. It's kind of the vernacular, the language of the day that the song, it sounds kind of strong in a way, but came home to me several years ago. I was thinking about When I was growing up, my sister and I, we lived in a house on Miles Avenue in Union City. It's a house that was the house I really remember growing up. Parents built a new house after I went to college, but that was the one I grew up in. And it had sliding glass door. You remember sliding glass door? You've still got sliding glass door? It had sliding glass door. And my grandfather died when I was just a little bitty fella. And my grandmother came to live with us for a little while. I called her Mama. And Mama would sit in this chair by the sliding glass doors, and she would watch me. I was just a little fella then, and she would watch me while I would play out in the backyard. I had some friends, Tony Barkley and Mark Graham, and then Tony's little brother Britt would sometimes tag along, and we'd play, And every now and then, I would do something that would make one of them cry and run home, even though they were 2 years older than me, but I was bigger than they were, and I'm not going to tell you what I did to them. We'll just keep that a secret. But and they'd cry and go home, and then I'd go inside, with my big bad self, and I'd walk in, Mama sitting in her chair, and Mama was overweight, but that made a soft lap. Man, that made the softest lap in the world. And I'd crawl up in her soft lap, and she would look at me and she would say, "Little Cliff." She called me Little Cliff because I'm a junior. I was named after my dad, born on his birthday, and so he said, "We're going to name him after me." And so I was Little Cliff, and she said, "Little Cliff, you hadn't been being ugly, have you? You haven't been being ugly, have you?" My grandmother, Mama, she died a long time ago when Janet and I were just kids. If she were still alive today, she could still ask me that question at times. And if I were honest, there would be times when I would have to say, I've been being ugly. Do you get where I'm coming from? See, that's the deal about, you can call that whatever you want to. You can call it being ugly. You can call it falling short. We can call it making mistakes. Or we can call it what it is, which is we are sinners. Now, I'm going to tell you, that's not going to fill up a lot of churches. Are you with me? It's just not. But it's the truth. It's the truth, and it's the truth in 100% of the cases. We can be really good. We can be really good. But we have a tendency here. You know what we call that? And I was going to preach on that this Sunday, but I'm going to hold off and wait till another time. We call it original sin. Original sin. There was a guy years ago, a preacher years ago, who said original sin, there's nothing original about it. I really like that. I think that makes sense. There's nothing original. What he meant by it is that it's been with us. One of my favorite authors from years ago, a guy named Frederick Buechner, said original sin simply means that we all originate out of a sinful world which taints us from the word go. Does that make sense to you? We originate out of we weren't born that way. God didn't make us that way. We originate out of a sinful world that taints us, and it taints us from the word go. And none of us escapes it. We all turn inward. If you'll go back, you read Paul's letters, and at some point we'll do, in our biblical studies, we'll turn to Paul's letters, and we'll study some of those. If you go back and read Paul's letter, Paul was rather, I think, very clear on this. For him, sin is, our definition of sin is anything that separates us from God, right? That's kind of an orthodox understanding of sin. Anything that separates us from God. What Paul said is the primary thing that separates us from God is our turning within. He called it selfish, self-centered, self-righteous pride. Selfish, self-centered, self-righteous pride. Not positive pride. You know positive pride. I'm proud to be your pastor. I'm just as proud of that as I can be. I'm proud to be Amy's husband. I'm proud of our 2 children. I'm proud of my grandson. That's a positive pride. Okay? That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about the kind of selfish, self-centered pride where life caves in around us, where everything is about us. Are you following me? Everything becomes about our needs, my wants, my desires become the most important thing in the world to me. There's nothing more important than what I want. What have we said in this study is the definition of God? Do you remember? Whatever is of ultimate importance in our life, whatever is most important in our life, that's our God. So you see what happens with selfish, self-centered, self-righteous pride. Who becomes God for us? We become the most important thing in our life. We become our own God. You know what? That's as old as the first story in the Bible. Right? That's the story of Adam, and Eve. That's that story. Remember the story of the Garden of Eden? And God created the Garden of Eden. And what did God say? All of this is everything is a gift, and you can have everything in it. It's all yours except what? One thing. One thing. There's one thing you can have. You can have everything else. It's all yours. It's a gift. It was just grace. The Garden of Eden. There's one thing you can't have. You can't eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So we ask, why not? Why not? You know why not? I've read that story. I studied that story, read it, studied it many times. This is all I can come up with. You know why not? Because God said, don't do it. And I think that's what the story is about. God said, don't do it. But you can have everything else. Don't do this. I don't know, in large part, or at least a part of the story of the Garden of Eden is letting God be God, the creator, and we're not. We're the creature. We're not the creator. So we follow the story of obedience and disobedience. Part of what that story is about is the human being wants to go. We want to go our own way. Everything it caves in. Life caves in on us, and when it caves in on us, we get separated from God. Sin. Are you with me? Anything that separates us from God, Paul said, this is what separates us the most. Pride. Pride is what separates us the most. We fall inward. Everything in life becomes about us. Jesus Christ died on the cross to do what? Save us of that. What does the word save mean? Well, if sin is anything that separates us from God, salvation, saving, is bringing us back. It's bringing us back at one with God. It's restoring that broken relationship. It's healing us of what it is that has caused the brokenness in our lives. And if you read what we've learned in Matthew's study, is that salvation can be in present tense. That salvation can happen. What Jesus does for us can happen right now. He can restore us right now. Remember the story of Zacchaeus? You remember the story of the wee little man? Wee little man was he climbed up in a sycamore tree to see what he could see? You remember? Do you remember when Zacchaeus came to his house and Zacchaeus said, all that I have taken from people, I'm going to restore that fourfold. And Jesus said, well, you remember the next verse in that story? Zacchaeus said, Jesus said, Zacchaeus, climb down. I've got to come to your house today. And everybody was upset with Jesus. Do you remember why they were upset with him? Because he's gone into the house of a sinner. He's gone into the house of a sinner. You see what we do? We classify people. The deal about sin being selfish, self-righteous, self-centered pride is sin is then a condition. The acts are those little sins, the little things that we do, but all of them arise out of the condition of this selfish, self-centered pride. So what we want to do oftentimes is rank those in a hierarchy. Well, I know I did this, But at least I didn't do that. You know, I mean, at least I did, because that's way up here. And you know, we have that. You know, there's sins that are more visible. There's acts that are more visible than others. But what Paul reminds us when you go back is, no, it's all a condition that separates us. So the salvation then brings us back. So what is it that brings us back and restores that brokenness? Well, our statement is what? Jesus' death on the cross. Jesus died on the cross to restore us, to bring us. We've talked about this so much all the way through Matthew's gospel. Jesus wants us to have life. He wants it so badly. Sunday sermon. He wants it so badly that he's willing to tell us the answer. You know, he gives us the answer in the middle of the course. This is the right. This is what you've got to do. He's not telling us that to beat us up and to beat us down. He's telling us that because this is where you really get life. Have you ever had those times where you got outside of yourself? I know you have. We've all had those. And hopefully we're doing it with the Living a Better Story experience, where you get outside of yourself and you do something for somebody else. Have you ever paid attention to how that makes you feel? You ever notice that you always feel better when you have done something? Do you remember the Christmas in your life when you, with your own money, bought your first gift for somebody in the family? Do you remember that one? There's nothing like that feeling of doing for other people. That's what Jesus is talking about. This is how you get life. And Jesus came so that we could have that restored in its fullness, to save us of our sin, to restore us, to mend our brokenness and bring us back at one with God. So here's the question then. So we come to the very beginning of the statement. How does the death on the cross then do that? All right, well, let's go back to our first passage of Scripture then tonight. How does the death on the cross do that? Here's a way of looking at it. Matthew 26, let's start with verse 36 again. Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane. He said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go yonder and pray." And taking with him Peter, the two sons of Zebedee, began to be sorrowful and troubled. So, Jesus was sorrowful. He was troubled. He said to them, "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch with me." And going a little farther, he fell on his face and prayed, "My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me." What was he praying? What was he asking for? When he said, let this cup pass from me, what's the cup that he's talking about? The cross, the crucifixion. What he's praying, isn't this what he's praying? He's saying, God, don't let this happen. Because Jesus knew crucifixion, they say, is the worst form of torturous death that has ever been devised by human beings. Jesus knew. So he's praying, don't take this away. Look, take this away. If you can take this away, take this away. Don't let this happen to me. Listen to it again. My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch with me. And going a little farther, he fell on his face and he prayed, "My Father, if it be possible, let this cup, this cross, this crucifixion, let this pass from me." Then, only after that, the next part, "Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. Not what I want, but what you want." Now then, here's the question. What was it that God willed? And that's an important question, and it's a question that we can just continue to struggle with. Jesus said, this is not what I want, but I want your will more. I want what you want more. Your will be done. So what was God's will? Well, some people say, well, it was God's will that Jesus die on the cross. That's one way of looking at it. It's ultimately what happened. Another way of looking at it is that what God willed for Jesus was for Jesus to do what? What was God's will for Jesus? Salvation. What's salvation? Being restored from our brokenness, being healed, being mended of our separation from God. He wanted that salvation. How was that going to happen? Well, all the way through Matthew's gospel, the way it's been happening is what? By Jesus living the way that he lived, which was what? Standing up against this oppressive government, standing up against this oppressive religious authority, hobnobbing, running around with whom? Who? Yeah, running around with sinners. He's gone into the house of a sinner. He's eating with a sinner. So forgiving those who have wronged over and over and over again. So another way of looking at this is that what God willed for Jesus was what? To keep living that way. Because that was living in the fullness of God, to keep living that way. If Jesus kept living that way, which was life, which Jesus said, this is how you get life as well. If Jesus was going to keep living that way, what was going to happen to him? If he kept living that way, what was going to happen? You know the answer to this. If he kept living that way, what was going to happen to him? What? Yeah, they were going to kill him. They were going to hang him on a stick. That's what they were going to do. If he kept living that way, then the cross was going to be what was going to come his way. Are you with me? Does this make sense? So Jesus died on the cross to save us of our sin, because that his way of life that led to the cross, God took what looked like defeat and turned it into victory. Now we jumped ahead to Easter, and we'll hold that for Easter Sunday. But his will was for him to live the way that he was going to live, which was going to get him on the cross, and God took that to bring us back at one with God. Does that make sense? He used that then to bring us back. What is it that saves us? What is it in that act that saves us, that restores us? Do you remember in Luke's gospel what it was that Jesus said to those that were responsible for putting him on the cross? It's only in Luke's gospel that we find this. But in Luke's gospel, Jesus said something to God about those people that hung him on the cross. What did he say? Father, forgive them. Look, they don't have a clue. They don't know what they're doing. Father, forgive them. The extreme act of love. And I think in that act, in those words, what we see is that, look, if he loves them, if he's calling upon God to love them that way, see how much he loves each one of us. And it's in that love that we find life restored. For God so loved the world. Are you with me? For God so loved the world that he gave. It's in that love hanging on the cross that if we can ever get that, if we ever get that, then it changes us. It changes the world if we ever get that. It changes everything about us, which is why the work of the church is so, so very important. Look at what happened in that 27th chapter. What happened, 27th chapter, we've got all those haunting words, Jesus on the cross, then verse 51, and behold, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. Why do you think that's there? What's that saying to us? We've been talking about how, Jesus came to show that we're all in this together. We got one thing in common. We are all sinners in need of the grace of God, which then saves us, brings us back at one with God. What's the whole point of the temple? You know anything about the temple in Jerusalem and how it was built? Have you ever given somebody like a surprise gift and you didn't want them to know what it was? It was in a little small box, and so you wanted to surprise them, and you knew if you gave them the small box they'd know exactly what it was. So you wrap that in a bigger box, and you wrap that in a bigger box, and wrap that in a bigger box. That was the Jerusalem temple. That was the temple in Jerusalem. It was built in kind of concentric boxes, and there were courts. The outer court was called the court of the Gentiles. And on that outer court, the court of the Gentile, anybody could go into that court. Anybody could go into the court of the Gentiles. But if you were a Gentile, that's as far as you could go, is in that outer court. The next court was called the women's court. And that was, you had to be Jewish, but any Jew could go into that next court. Male or female could go into the next court. But that's as far as the women could go. The next court was the men's court, and that's where the male Jews could go. And then inside that was the priestly court. So the men could only go as far as the men's court. Only the priests, who were all men, could go into the next court. And then within that court was the one that we've all heard of, and that was called the Holy of Holies. And in the Holy of Holies that's where the mercy seat was located. And the mercy seat, that's where you were able to obtain forgiveness and restoration. Only one person could go into the Holy of Holies, and they can only go into the Holy, it was the high priest could go into the Holy of Holies. So not just any priest, but the high priest could go into the Holy of Holies. They could only go into the Holy of Holies, the place where the mercy seat was located, where you receive forgiveness and restoration. They could only go one day of the year, the Day of Atonement, which is called Yom Kippur. One day of the year, high priest. Guess what separated the Holy of Holies from everything else? Curtain. Curtain separated, because there were classes, there was differentiations, okay? And the curtain separated. What's this talking about with the curtain being torn from top to bottom? Years ago when Amy and I lived in Lubbock, we still fly some, but we don't fly like we used to. When we lived out in Lubbock, Texas, and by the way, it's a wonderful place to live, great people. We have great memories of living out there, but it's a long way from anywhere, and especially Tennessee. And so when we had to get back, we learned if we were going to get back with any time to visit, we needed to fly. So we would fly out there a lot. We were flying one time. I can't remember exactly what happened, but something happened. It was the airline's fault, and they bumped us into first class. The one and only time that I ever... Have you ever flown first class? One and only time. And it didn't cost us any extra. They said, look, the only way we can get you on this flight, it was like they were apologizing. Only way we can get you on this flight is to put you in first class. Well, wow, gee whiz. I guess we'll take it. So we got into first class. We sat in first class. I'm going to tell you something. First class, that is a cool way to fly right there. First class. You know what they give you in first class? Warm towels. Did you know that? Yeah, we're sitting there in first class. They brought out warm towels. I was just like, whoa, warm towels, this is great. And when I sat down, all my height, I'm only 6'2", but all my height is waist down. And when I sit, usually my knees are touching my chin. My knees weren't touching my chin. I'm sitting there, I can stretch out. This is nice. And then, I'm going to get a load of this. They came by, and they called me by name. And they called Amy by name. They knew our names. We weren't just nobody. It was Mr. Wright. Mr. Wright, could I get you something to drink? Oh, wow. They know my name. Get me something to drink. Warm towel. This is great. And guess what else they had? What else did they have? You know what they have in the first class? What did they have? Yeah. They got a curtain. They got a curtain. Yeah. Yeah. Curtain's pretty cool, because it separates you from all the riffraff. And here's what I found. I didn't even tell my family this, but when others were coming on, I'm going to tell you, it gets in you. It gets in you real fast. It didn't take long. It took me about 2 minutes. It started to get in me. It started to go. I said, whoa, I'm in first class. People started coming by. I wanted to make sure and look them in the eyes. I wanted them to see me. Get a load of this, big boy. I'm in first class. Hey, they know my name. Warm towel, warm towel. And you look back there, you know what they're doing back there in the riffraff section? Yeah, you know what they're doing. You know what they're doing. They're fighting over the overhead bin space, hitting each other in the head with their luggage, because that's what the riffraff do. And then they pull the curtain, and they separate classes. Hey, they separate you. They separate you. When Jesus died on the cross to save us of our sin, what happened? The curtain was what? Torn. From where? Top to bottom. What's that saying? No more classes. No more classes. We may have classes. We may have them. God has no classes. Are you with me? God has no classes. It's sinners all saved by the grace of Jesus Christ dying on the cross for us. Can you wrap your heads around that tonight? God loves you so much that He wants this so badly for you and me. He wants it so badly for us. He sent His Son to show us the way, to live the way for us, to tell us what it is that we need to do to have that life that we want. You know what we do? We go our own way. We eat of the fruit. Are you with me? You can have all this. Don't do this. We go our own way. We have all done it. You've done it, and I've done it. There have been times in my life where I have done and lived the way Jesus wanted and wants me to live. And those are the happiest, most joyful, life-fulfilling moments of my life. And you've lived them too. And then there are those times that I go back. And you go back. Go back. Listen. We live in a culture, you and I, where it's 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. We hear a message that is contrary to the message of Jesus. Are you guys with me? It's 7 days a week. We hear it. It's all over everywhere. It's all over everywhere. And it's a message that is, you get what you want. You live the way you want. It's all about you. Jesus said, no, it's when you get outside yourself and lose yourself. That's where you get. And we have done that. You have done that, and you have tasted it. It's why church is so important. We encourage each other to live that way all the time. Listen, guys, that's all Living a Better Story is about. It's all the experience is about. It's tasting it once again. It's doing something to get ourselves out of ourselves. Yes, we help other people, but when we help other people, we give ourselves. That's taking up our cross. It's living a sacrificial life of servanthood. It's not doing a service. See, that's different. See, doing a service is, oh, hey, I did that. I checked that off. You know? It's living a life of servanthood. That's what gives us life. Jesus died on the cross that we have that to save us of our sin, of our brokenness. Then he closed with, go baptize them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, teaching them all that I've commanded you. This is so important that he wants us to share this and to teach this with others. Look, what I'm getting out of Matthew's gospel is this. What I get out of Matthew's gospel more clearly than any other gospel is Matthew is saying, listen, you have got to make Christ first. Cliff, you've got to make Christ first. He's got to be the Lord of your life. If he is, it will change your life. It will give you life like you've never had life before. Is this making sense to you? See how he's saying it all the way through? You've got to make him Lord, but it's got to be him and nothing else. Guys, we live in a culture, I'm telling you, there is stuff all around. I'm going to mention one thing. I may mention this briefly in the sermon this Sunday. But I'm going to give you a little bit more of it. Look, now before I say it, I want you to know something about me. So a lot of you already know this. I'm a sports guy. Okay, I love music. I don't know anything about music. I don't know how to play anything. I can't sing a lick. I love to listen to people that can sing well. I love it. Sports, I did a little bit of that. I love sports. I think sports are one of the greatest things in the world. I think you learn a lot from sports. I help coach my son's Little League baseball team. I help coach one of his basketball teams. I know a little something about it, not a lot, but a little. But I love it. You put me in Busch Stadium in St. Louis on a hot July day, and it's like I'm one step from heaven. Are you with me? I still remember lessons that I learned from a guy named Jimmy Whitby, who was my Little League coach when I was 9 years old. I learned for the first time about hitting the cutoff man. And I learned about swinging a bat. But he taught other things that come from great lessons of sports about giving yourself up for the team, that the team comes first, not you. Gosh, that's Jesus talk. So, I'm a big sports guy. I believe in sports. Are you with me? Sunday, on my way to church, at 7:40, this was 7:40 in the morning, this past Sunday, on my way to church, at the park at DeJarnett, they were playing baseball. Organized teams were playing baseball. I'm a big sports fan. One of my favorite players is Adam Wainwright. He's a pitcher for the St. Louis Cardinals. He's a big Christian guy. He talks about his faith. He shares his faith. He has an impact on a lot of young people because of that. But 7:40 in the Sunday morning, in the city that you and I live in, there was organized games going on. I asked the staff about it Tuesday. I said, am I missing something? And they said, oh no, you're not missing anything. You saw it. Yeah, that ship has sailed. Back in 1992, when we were living in Slidell, Louisiana, I was taking my son out every day, throwing batting practice to him, hitting ground ball after ground ball after ground ball after ground ball after ground ball. When he'd miss one, I would tell him Ozzie would have had it because Ozzie Smith was his favorite player. We had a month in March where it rained every day. Okay, not hard every day, but it rained every day in the month of March. What that did is that put the Little League behind schedule, and they had to have makeup games, and they started playing on Sunday. I found out who the president of Little League was in the community, and I called him up. He didn't go to our church, but he went to church. And I was talking to him. I felt sorry for him. I really did. That guy was getting beat up on both ends. On both ends, that guy was getting beat up. He told me, he said, Pastor, here's my problem. I got parents, and they said, we paid for this many games, and we got to have them. And he said, the only way I can have them is we got to play on Sunday mornings. I said, listen, I'm going to tell you what you're doing. By doing that, you're making the church out to be the enemy, because these mamas and daddies are having to say to their children, if they want them in church, no, you got to be in church because we've said Jesus is first. I said, now for an 11-year-old boy or girl or 12-year-old or 10-year-old, you know what they hear? If my buddies get to go and play, what they hear is church is bad. Church is the enemy. Church is keeping me from being with my buddies. And the coach has said, if I'm not there, I can't start. I said, yeah, I get that. I get that. I said, I got a son that plays. I get that. I said, can we make a deal? He said, well, try me. I said, can you give us Sunday morning? Give us Sunday morning. Let Jesus have Sunday morning. We'll let you have Sunday afternoon. And we'll make that compromise. And don't start the games till 1:30, 2 o'clock. So they did. So that's what they did. You know what I think we got to have? I think we got to have people that, and maybe you're sitting here tonight saying, good Lord, Cliff. I mean, lighten up, guy. It's just a game. I mean, it's a game. Lighten up. See what Matthew is saying to us all the way through? Matthew is saying, if Jesus is first, nothing else can be first. If Jesus is Lord, nothing else can be Lord. You know what we've done? We've said Jesus is Lord as long as there's nothing else to do. Are you guys with me? If there's nothing else to do, we'll go to church. If there's nothing else to do, Jesus will be Lord. And Jesus said, you got to choose. Cliff, you got to choose. You got to choose. You got to make a choice. And he said it from the birth. Remember, at the birth. At the birth, we talked about that. What was it? There's a choice. God's kingdom had come, and you got to choose. Is it going to be the kingdom of this world, or is it going to be God's kingdom with Christ as the Lord of our life? And then all the way through that, he's saying, make this choice. You got to make this choice. You got to make this choice. And he takes up his cross, and he said, you got to make a choice. You got to make a choice. Peter didn't want that, because Peter knew, wait a minute, if he goes to Jerusalem, I got to go to Jerusalem. And if he goes to Jerusalem and gets the cross, more than likely I'm going to get the cross. You know what I think? We're going to talk about this Sunday. You know what I think Peter wished he had said? I'll follow you anywhere except Jerusalem. And Jesus said, I need you to follow me wherever, because it changes your life. Listen, I'm not saying this tonight to take fun out of life. I'm going to tell you. I spent this past weekend with my son watching basketball, one of the best weekends of my life. We watched basketball. We had tickets. I had tickets. I was sitting in Bridgestone, okay? When I wasn't in church, I was watching basketball with my son. One of the greatest weekends of my life. I'm all over sports. I'm all for them. In fact, I'm all for them so much that sometimes if I'm not careful, it can start to creep in to be the most important thing in my life. Are you guys with me? Now, you may be sitting here and sports ain't any issue for you, but it's something else. What I'm saying is, in our culture today, people like you and me better stand up, or we're going to have a generation after us, and there ain't going to be anything to stand up for. And somewhere along the line, it's just got to be mamas and daddies. And mamas and daddies have got to say what Donnie Mitchell's daddy said years ago. Donnie Mitchell is the head of the mission team to Guatemala. He's the lay leader at Madison Street Methodist in Clarksville. Donnie played quarterback for Aaron High School back in the 70s. They were good. They were real good. Donnie was their quarterback. His dad was the pastor, the senior pastor of the Church of the Nazarene, First Church of the Nazarene in Aaron. Donnie's brothers also played on the team. Donnie's dad went to the coach. They were going to practice on Sunday. They were going to watch film on Sunday after the game on Friday. Donnie's dad went and said, my sons won't be coming. They won't be coming. They all started. They were all starters. Guess what they didn't do on Sunday? They didn't practice on Sunday because somebody stood up and said, my boys won't be there. At some point, we got to make a decision as to who is first and what is first. Jesus died on the cross for us so that we could have life, real life that matters. We just have to choose who we follow. That's why this stuff is so meaningful to me. It's meaningful to me because it challenges me. I'm appreciative to you guys for letting me, giving me the opportunity to be able to do this, to teach, to come and to teach you. It's a gift that you've given to me. I hate to see the semester come to an end, but I'm blessed to have been able to have led these last 20 weeks with you on what is for me one of my favorite books of the Bible. God bless you. Let's come and pray.